Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, founder and principal consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I want to take what we did here with our average salary and our average experience and add that functionality to two additional fields. So we now have our average time in position and total employees. Um, if you haven't watched the previous videos, particularly the last video, I highly suggest you watch that because this is where we created these functions. And in between these videos, I went ahead and just added two more fields in here. And what we're going to do is essentially the same exact thing that we've been doing to find our average experience and average salary and just add on average time in position, and we can send this to our helper function that we created to calculate the average. Now, our total employees, we're not going to use that helper function because we're not getting the average, we're just getting the total number of employees. So, how we're going to do that is we're going to take a field with some plain text in it, such as, a column would be the division, put that into an array, and then simply get the length of that array, and then that'll tell us how many employees there are, or we could do last name or whatever. But for now, we're just going to use division because we're a fully staffed company in our random data set here. So we'll just use division here. And the other piece that I'd want to do is I want to take our get salary data function here and create a helper function, just like we did with our calculate average, to where we're not having to necessarily do this all the time. So let's go ahead and get started with the time and position piece. Since we're here, we are going to need to add on some information to our array of objects that we're passing. So right now we are passing a key called experience, salary, and gender. And we're mapping the rows of our selected columns, which is this array right here. And for every row, we're taking the value at the third index, fourth index, fifth index, and then assigning it appropriately. So we can do the same logic. And let's just call this position time. That'll be the key. And the position time is going to be 0, 1, 2. Okay, and then we can come over to our total rewards page here. And if we come down and to the fields that I created while we were, in between episodes, we need to grab the element ID for this average time in position. So that is time in position. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up here and paste it so we have it. Okay, so we just put it right here because we're going to use it. What we need to do on our client side here is create, just like we did with our salaries and experience, create a empty array to where we can send all this data from our for each. So let's call this average position time. And this average position time is going to be set to an equal array because there's nothing in it yet. And for our for each, we want to simply come down and for our av position time, we want to push the object, this row object, at this key, which contains that value. So pause time. Okay, good. So that takes care of that. Now what we need to do is take this array that now has something in it and pass it over to our HTML and input it into the appropriate field. So what we can do is just copy this. And let me get rid of this real quick. This is going to go right there. And we're not actually going to pass the experience to our helper calculate average function. We're going to pass the average position time. And we need to create a different variable name for this. Time in position. And the value is going to be average time in position. So now let's save this and come back over here to our form and see if this works. So when I refresh this, what should happen is everything will run like normal, but we will have a number here based on all of our employees' data. So let's refresh this and see. So there's all of our data. And it appears that for all 500 of our employees, our average time in position is 607. And then our total number or our average of experience altogether for each employee is 874. Okay, good. So now let's build out our total employees. So let's come back over to our, oh, no, actually, let's stop for a second because I just realized this was only on the initial get salary data. And each one of these drop-down boxes, these filtering drop-down boxes, fires its own function. So if we come up here and try to select this, it will run everything except for this average time in position. It'll give us this not a number error. And the reason it's doing that is because we did this for our get salary data, but those filters are actually running their own function, which is our comp div filter and our comp job filter. So let's add that same exact key here, except the key, if you remember right, up here, this key is pulling the second element or the second index of this selected columns array. When we're doing this filtering, it's taking that whole employee full data. So what we need now is it's not going to be in the second array or the second index because the second index is 0, 1, 2. Well, that's not our division. What we need is 3, 4, 5. So we need to come back over here and change this to 5. Now we can save it. And because we already did everything over here, this isn't going to change at all. So now come back over to our UI. What we just did should take care of that NaN. Because now it's going to have something in that object that involves our average time of position. So let's do our division, marketing. Okay, it looks like marketing is still NaN. Finance is NaN. Okay, so this is still coming up as not a number. So let's go see what we did here. Come over here to our analytics. So our employee full data, when we're mapping this pause time should be row 5. And then that is row 5. And then that is row, oh, that's why. That's why. because we're looking at the division. I don't know why I was doing the division. My apologies. We're not doing the division. We're doing the time. So the time is actually, this is our full-time experience, and this is the time in the position. So this shouldn't be 2. This is 2, but instead of 5, our index in our full employee data should be 11. And where I'm getting that is, for someone wondering, I was getting ahead of myself counting up the total number of employees. It should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Number. Got it. Okay. So let's come back over here and we'll save. My apologies. I was getting ahead of myself. I was getting excited about finding out how many number of employees we had. Okay, so now let's refresh this, and that should take care of it. And hopefully it doesn't make a liar out of me. Let's go to human resources, and there we go. Okay, good. Go back to marketing just for principal. There we are. And then let's do the same thing to job title, 5.9. Okay, good. So now let's do the same thing to our total employees. So now we can go to our division. So our division is row 5. So in our salary data, our initial salary data, we already have this passed down. So let's do a key called employee count. And that employee count is going to be row 0, because remember, we're doing the selected column, so it's going to be that 0 index. And this one down here isn't going to be 0, it's going to be 5. Because we're pulling from that main array instead of breaking down the array. Okay, good. So this should take care of the server side piece. So now let's take this employee count and actually create an array. And we can do that the same exact way here. Let's create a variable, and let's create, or the variable is going to be equal to an empty array. So let's just call this total employee. Let's just call this total employees. This is going to be equal to an empty array. And then let's push some data to that. And the data we're going to push is whatever is inside our employee count key that we are sending over. And now what we can do is something similar, except we're not actually going to send anything to a function. So we're not going to send anything to our calculate average function. So let's just create a variable, and let's call this one total num imps. And the total num imps is going to simply be this empty, well, it's not empty anymore, but this array that we filled by pushing every value of our row.imp count object key value pair. And what we're simply wanting to do is find out how many elements there are in that array, so we can simply just type length. And now what we need to do is take this and populate it to our input field. Let's find out what our ID is for our total employee, total imp. Okay. That'll work. Total imp. And this is going to be equal to not our average time of position, but our total num imp. Okay, so now let's save this. And let's see how this works. So when we first refresh this, it's going to grab all the employees in there. So this number should be 500. And nothing. We have an error somewhere. So let's go back here and find our error. And there's our error right there. Not a colon, a semicolon. When nothing happens, usually it's a syntax error. Usually we should be getting something in here like nan or something. Okay, so now let's refresh this. And yep, that took care of it. Okay, good. And then we can change this to a division, should update it. And then we change this to that. We can see how many HR generalists we have. Wow, 74 for 500. It's a very, very deep HR team. And just out of curiosity, for executive pieces, okay, 0. So our randomized data is a little too random. We don't have anybody in our executive office. And the good thing that we did when we actually created our helper function that does the averages is we accounted for if it was an empty array. So we wouldn't get that error by trying to divide by 0. So it's just going to return 0, and that's exactly what we did. Okay, good. So we have this. And what I'm going to do now is I want to take this salary data and how we essentially carved out the columns based on an array of indices or index in plural. And I want to turn this into a helper function. Just since we have this, I'm going to also do a helper function for pulling out selected columns. So let's create a function here and let's call it extract dynamic columns, I guess. That'll work. And what we're going to want to pass to this from wherever function or whatever is coming, wherever it's coming from, we need 2 pieces of information. One, we need the data set. So if this function was sending information over here trying to get this to pull out columns and essentially create this array, we would need that data set. We would need that 2-dimensional array. So we can just pass that and call it R. And then the other thing we're going to need is the indices. Are we wanting to get the 5, 18, 11? That's what we're going to need. So we can just call this indices. Now, what we're going to need to do is we are going to need to map, and I know this may be a little confusing, and it's confusing at first, but once you really start understanding what maps does, it will start making more sense. We have 2 arguments here, and we are going to map them at the same exact time or in the same exact line. We are going to map initially the R, that array that's coming to us. If we were sending this whole int full data, that's what would be inside this argument here. And we want to map that. And we want to essentially go row by row. And this can be anything. I'm just using row to give it a name so we can reference it. So within this R map, within this data set, we are wanting to go row by row based on a certain number of indices. So we need to map that as well. And we need another variable that we can retrieve. I don't want to call it row. Let's just call this index because that's really what it is, based on a index. And we need to follow the same exact syntax here. And we're going to return the row based on this index. So it is a map within a map, taking an array and then mapping it based on whatever indexes are being passed through it. So how this can work, well, first we need to return that. There we go. So to test this out, let's do function test, our handy testing function. And what we should do is let's go ahead and give this, let's give indices, the plural of index. Oh, it gets me every time. And let's just give this an index array of this. So we have 5, 18, 11, 12, 29, 23. Okay. And now what we want to do is send this indexes, this whole array, over to this helper function. And we can store that in a variable so we can log it out. So let's call this EDC test. And what we're going to do is call that function. And what we're going to pass within this function is our employee full data, which is saved in a global variable. That is going to be our AR. So let's just call it imp full data. All right. And then the indexes is this array right here. These are the index numbers that we want to map by. So we can just simply call that indices. And then let's log this out and see what we got. And we should get the same data that is in here. So let's save that, and then we will select test. And then run it. And here we go. So we have the division, job title, time and position, total experience, annual salary, and gender. So now that we have this helper function, if you chose, you could go through and instead of having it do this select columns, you could simply just set this to, like this EDC test is what we used, and then return that variable based on this other map. And then that way you can dynamically pass different columns in here, because if you think about doing analysis inside HR, when we're doing HR analytics, we may need to do a little bit more things than this. Like we may want to base an analysis on, like age, or even exempt, non-exempt, or union coverage or whatnot. So we may need to pull other columns, and particularly I'm thinking of our benefit information. We're going to pull different columns based on different situations and analysis. And what we did was we created this helper function to dynamically do just that, to where we're not having to fill up a whole bunch of functions that essentially do the same exact thing. So I'm going to end this video here, and then the next video, what we will do is we will consolidate some of our get salary data and this piece here, and we can just use our helper function to do that stuff for us. So I hope this has been informative, and if you like what we're doing, please hit that subscribe button. Let us know that we should continue on down this content path and subjects. If you do have an idea of a subject or would like to see us put something together, please feel free to drop us an email, and we will put something together and get it posted. And until next time, please take care.